Hi, this is Rich Harrington, and you are listening to Photofocus. Our guest this week is Richard Kelly, who is both a professional photographer and an educator. Richard, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
I'd be happy to. I'm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been a photographer practicing for, over 20 years now. Started out as an assistant and worked my way up to my own clients back in the 80s. Started to get into teaching photography, I think about 6 years ago, and I teach at Pittsburgh Filmmakers, which is a wonderful institution here that combines both photography and video and filmmaking as a nice little practice. So I got involved with ASMP back when I first started as an assistant, and over the years I've been chapter president and treasurer, and later I joined the national board and became the president. And my big focus as president over the last few years was education for emerging photographers, as well as professional development for practicing professionals like myself, and copyright and licensing, and how do we stay sustainable as a career.
Great.
Have been my focuses.
And those are all things we're going to actually explore on this week's show. So for those of you listening, Richard is an excellent guest. He's been teaching copyright and business topics for years. We first met each other at ASMP, that's the American Society of Media Photographers, and at their conference called Strictly Business. And I was impressed with some of his classes, and he was serving as president at the time of ASMP and had some great ideas on just general success for the industry. So why don't we start there? There's a lot of folks who listen to this show who would classify themselves as emerging professionals. In other words, they've started focusing on making this a career. What are some of the biggest flubs you see early on, things that people make a lot harder on themselves than maybe they need to do?
Well, using myself as an example, I think not engaging other professionals as early as possible and building little mentorships, if you will. I think learning from people who sort of come before you is extremely valuable. I think I did that very well on the creative side, but I didn't necessarily choose good business models early on, people to follow.
Well,
so I think that's
sometimes some people are open with their business practices,
right,
and some are closed. So, I guess a lot of people are used to, well, no one would share with me how they do business. Have you encountered that there is a group of photographers who are actually willing to talk about business with each other and best practices?
Well, it's funny. I think for many years that was the common fear among working professionals, is the next person coming up is going to replace me, more or less. And I think that fear is obviously still out there. So I think it's about choosing the right people. I think that one of the things I tried to nurture at ASMP was this idea that we have to do that our members need to help the emerging professionals. So not everyone's going to be open to that idea, but I think if you find the right person, and I try to be that mentor to the people I work with, the young people I work with over the past, let me say 10 years, I've been doing internships. I think that you can find those people. For me, kind of looking back, I've been doing it now for, about 10 years, is now I'm starting to see the fruits of my work, because those young emerging professionals, from a few years ago are now starting successful careers. In fact, tonight, one of my students was giving a presentation on opening a photography business as an emerging photographer to a group of emerging photographers. So I feel like he's passing on the lessons that I worked with him.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
And so if I'm understanding the best piece of advice here is that look for a professional group that you can join, perhaps a local chapter of ASMP or online communities, but that there are people in the photography industry willing to share. Obviously, for those of you who are Photofocus listeners and readers, you're familiar with the Going Pro site that Scott also runs, with a lot of good resources there. So opening yours is a part of it. What are some other things, perhaps, as people are moving in? You bring up the real fear that a lot of people face, which is, if I let this information out, these people who are emerging are going to take my place. Similarly, one of the things I've observed is that a lot of people who are in an emerging class sometimes feel like they need to destroy the system or okay, I'm going to come in and just do everything different so I stand out. Is there some danger there, with especially with things around pricing or handling clients and rights? We seem to be in a huge shift right now in that space.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of myth and mythology that underlies a lot of this fear on both sides of this equation you're talking about, both on the photographer end and also the emerging photographer end. But I would go as far as to say that if you're being considered for a project, you should know that it hopefully is not because of just the price. And if it's not just because of the price, then you should really know what your value is in that project. And I guess that maybe sounds a little bit convoluted, but if your quality of your work is good enough to be considered, then you probably should be, valuing your work at that level. And I think that a common mistake that many emerging photographers feel is that they'll say, well, I haven't been doing this long enough, or I don't have the experience that somebody else has, so I should charge less. And I don't necessarily think that's always the case. I think that that's why working with professionals in the same area of interest that you're wanting to work in will give you a good, I think a good sense of what's possible. A good example is the wedding business, and as a commercial photographer, I've been doing weddings for 20 years, almost actually longer than I've been doing commercial photography, and I find that there's a lot of low confidence in what they're bringing to their clients. And I hear from my students and I hear from emerging photographers that, well, I can't charge as much as you do, Richard, because, I don't have the experience. Well, I think that may be true for your first one or two weddings, but once you get past that, you have enough experience. People are giving you the confidence in doing their wedding. You can't be undervaluing what you do because you won't be in business for very long.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think I think when you hit on a nice argument there is when you make the argument about price, you will very quickly start losing the jobs that you were winning on price because it doesn't take long for somebody cheaper than you to come out, and all that does is creates sort of a
right,
vicious cycle. Now, that's not to say that everybody should charge the same. We
right.
one, we can't have collusion. Two, different people will charge differently for their rates. I know
Mhm.
some extremely talented folks who don't want to work very much and they just charge a lot so they don't have to work. I have some categories of work I don't like doing and I put really high rates on. And if people pay it, it's like, okay, well, they're willing to pay that. So I guess I'm willing to go. It crossed that threshold. Um, but I think that's obviously a very personal discussion. But what you're hinting at there that I think is an important lesson for people to take is that there are some rates that you need to be looking at that can provide for a reasonable standard of living. And you don't want to be undervaluing the profession because that's just going to ultimately hurt everybody in the long run.
Exactly. And so one of the exercises that will often come up with my interns or with some other photographers I'm mentoring is this idea of, well, how do I know what's out there? And I said, well, this is where it becomes very interesting, and this is the work that you have to put into your craft and to your business. You have to, it's not always easy, and it's not always fun. I think you have to, you put some effort into finding out, identifying who your market is. Who are you trying to find as your customers? And it's not everybody. I think this is another misconception that many emerging photographers have is that everybody is a potential client. And the reality is that you're really looking for a solid handful of commercial clients. And if you're doing retail work like weddings or portraits, you're still only going to be able to do so many pictures in a year. I mean, just from a time standpoint. So you're looking, how many clients are you really looking to find? And a friend of mine who's a car salesman, and I think that's, I sort of touch on sales here for a second. Sales is a big part of what we do. And if the more you can learn about making and closing a sale is going to be very, very beneficial in your visual arts business. But a friend of mine who was a car salesman always used to say that you have to meet like 10 people to make a sale. So his goal was to meet as many groups of 10 people as he possibly could. And for my business, what I do is I try to identify the market I want to go after, who's buying, what are they spending, and then focus on my marketing effort towards them. That doesn't mean other people won't contact me, but I know who I'm going after, and I know what they're willing to spend money on.
Yeah,
And
and that ties into almost everything you do, from the
right,
marketing materials to how you structure your website to how you
ex
price yourself.
exactly. And a good example is I did some research. Like I was mentioning before, I have this sort of side wedding business I've had for years, and I noticed that my sales were slipping, meaning that I was going from an average of 5 to 7 weddings a year down to only a couple of actual closed weddings. And I was asking myself, well, what changed? What had happened? And when I did some research, I realized that other people had moved into the space that I was occupying before. And it wasn't just the price, because the price had stayed pretty constant. What had changed was the services they were offering. And so I had to then reevaluate, do I want to offer those same services, or do I want to do something completely different? And that then told me what I needed to start charging, and it also told me what I wasn't going to be going after. And I think that is exactly what you're talking about in terms of what your website looks like, what your marketing materials looks like. It's all based on that value that you have to, and that takes research. You have to do a little work on that.
Well, and to that end, for example, I noticed early on that clients were very interested in web content, and that people were always interested in us doing fusion type projects, mixing photos and videos together and, pushing that. And so, that's something we decided to do. Similarly, services of photography that I've been pushing lately have been my time lapse and my panoramic work, and I'm seeing stuff pick up on that front. You hinted at this quite well, which is you can't be good at everything, and you have to then decide how you're positioning that and then put it in relation to what everybody else is showing. And so I imagine as you started to look at some of those competitors, you kept your ears up. In other words, you went from saying, okay, I had about the same number of people calling me for work, but I'm winning fewer jobs. Time to look at what's happening and why.
Exactly, and I learned a lot. And so then I called some of my it's interesting, the photography business. We're competitors, but at least in a market like Pittsburgh, I know most of my competitors, and I consider many of them to be close friends. And that's okay, because I feel like if the project is right for me, I'll get the project, and I don't get every project. But I called some of them on the phone, and I explained to them, why I was calling and what I was looking to learn. And they were extremely open to what they were doing. And most of them, I learned in the process, were very busy. They were actually as full as they could be, because they had done the homework that I was doing. They had done it a year earlier, and they knew that, and they were willing.
You were
Yeah,
busy running ASMP then. It's okay.
in fact, I was, and so I made a decision, and the decision was to change what I was offering, which meant that I was probably targeting fewer people, but at a very specific price point, who was interested in the type of photography I wanted to deliver. I wasn't interested in changing my style or approach. I just needed to find the people who were interested in what I was doing.
Could you share one or two specifics of some of the products or services that people were adding to their expanded portfolio that were really resonating?
Well, I think, a big thing that I started to notice right away was that photographers were offering these sessions, like I guess they would be called engagement sessions, that were pretty involved production-wise. And they were doing wonderful work in that area, but that wasn't something I was really interested in adding to my repertoire. I also noticed that many of them were doing very highly stylized, almost fashion-like additions to their portfolios, and I admired their effort. My background is in fashion photography, so it's not like I was unaware that that was a possibility. It just didn't fit into what I was most comfortable doing. But I thought they did that very well. In terms of actual products, I I recently attended one of the big conventions for wedding photography, and I was impressed, immensely impressed by some of the products that are now available that weren't even, nobody was even thinking about this stuff 5 years ago, in terms of pressed books and ancillary materials that brides can get for their invitations and thank yous, and there's just stuff. I mean, if you can think of it, it's out there. And if you're a photographer and that's what you're interested in selling, there's so many options for you. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in telling a story and delivering a package, as a story. So I immediately kind of was carving out what I'm not interested in adding. But one of the things I am interested in doing is offering higher quality products, prints, and books that I hadn't been offering before, because I realized that was one thing I wasn't doing.
Good. Well, that's a perfect transition for me to talk about two of our sponsors that might help. One is SmugMug. So if you are looking to put together very extensive portfolios, online galleries to showcase your work, be sure to take a look over at smugmug.com. They have an extensive offering there with very customizable websites and new changes happening on the back end to make it easier to build your custom look. Plus, they also offer a fulfillment option tied to multiple printers. So as your customers are browsing and want to order prints, you could take a look at that. And if you need some new equipment for one of your shoots coming up, be sure to take a look at borrowlenses.com. They have an extensive range of Canon, Nikon, other types of gear, so you can go ahead and rent that. All the popular lenses if you want to try it out, video equipment for a shoot. So be sure to take a look at borrowlenses.com if a special project comes up where you need to sort of extend your capabilities. So this all makes sense about looking at expanding things a bit and evaluating what you're comfortable selling and making sure you have that. Let's talk about another area that all folks struggle with, and that is setting rates. A lot of changes have been happening in the market. I see photographers adding video and they're very confused by what to charge for it. We're seeing people coming in and, the whole pricing model changing when it comes to licensing, of people wanting electronic rights to be posting their portraits or their photos to social media and on the web. What are some of the most popular changes you're seeing, or the hardest changes you're seeing facing photographers when it comes to figuring out what to charge for their services, since we're really just changing the way that photos are being distributed so much these days?
Well, you really hit on kind of the Pandora's box of the entire photography business, because I think when we had a very specific, what I would call the print model, where buying the space, either buying a billboard or buying an ad in a magazine, or and I guess you could consider a TV commercial or a cable commercial, that was very finite space, and so that finite space had greater value to the buyer of the space, the person who was doing the advertising, and so therefore the photographer could easily look at that and say, okay, well, you're spending X number of dollars on this particular media buy, and so the photography must be worth X amount of dollars. That worked pretty well for 25, 30 years. But now we're living in a time when space isn't scarce. The web is almost limitless. I don't know if there actually is an end. I always enjoyed that commercial where they reach the end of the internet. But I think that it's and so what this has done is it's opened up so many what I consider opportunities, because it now gives us more places that photography can be used. And in fact, photography is one of the most valued tools of communication. It doesn't require translation, and so you're seeing it more ways than ever of using photography. The challenge for the photographer now is to figure out now what's that value, and it's not just on what it costs to have that ad placed, because sometimes that price is very, very small, because it's maybe based on unique viewers, or it might be based on keywords or something. So it's a harder metric to value based on what the person paid for the space.
And we're also seeing people pushing and not even understanding, oh, well, I hired you to shoot this. I own everything, right?
Right. Which is a whole different kind of problem. But I think for photographers facing the pricing dilemma, a couple of things to keep in mind. The first order of business is just basic business, and that's whether you own a mom and pop popsicle stand or you own, a fairly large company, and that is, what does it cost to actually do what you do? Let's not get into the whole usage aspect. Let's just talk about what it takes to be in your business, and that includes your salaries and your overhead and your in what you've built from a reputation standpoint. These are all the values that are really kind of hard to put numbers to when you're first starting out, because you don't have a track record, you don't have a bank record to show. But you can, I think, use, again, working with somebody who's been in business for a while, get a sense of what does it cost to turn the lights on, and what does it cost to have a basic kit and be set up ready to go out. And actually, this is an interesting tie-in to one of your sponsors. Is I think that there's for emerging photographers, there's this. I think it might be what photographers and video geeks like all of us are. We want to own everything. And that can be your first downfall. If you feel like you have to own everything, you're going to be so obsessed with equipment that you're not going to be focusing on getting work. And I would say that not having to own everything, but being able to rent it or literally borrow from a friend as you're starting out is a great is a great thing to get past to be successful. Don't spend all your money too soon, or don't borrow money that you don't need to borrow. But anyway, getting into the whole the setting of fees and pricing, I think that what I'm seeing on the commercial side is that many corporate, not advertisers, but the corporate core of my business, they're not necessarily sure how they're going to use the images when they're creating them. And they also want to be able to be free of the fear of using pictures without permission, which would a liability. Yeah,
we're seeing a lot of lawyers writing contracts that just basically take the stance of,
right.
Okay, so this is work for hire, and everything you do, including the pre-production paperwork, the scouting, and oh, by the way, maybe your computer, just so we're safe, is now our property. Is that okay? Sign here.
Yeah. And I think that that's just a little bit of overzealousness on their part, because of course their job is to keep their companies from liability concerns. But I think that, at least what I've tried to do with my clients is to alleviate some of that by taking, sort of a proactive approach and encouraging them to figure out creative ways to use the pictures, and then also trying to maximize my value both in their eyes and also in my pocketbook as early as possible. And I think that comes from confidence in having done it for so long. But I've also seen some emerging photographers who are confident in what they're doing and what they're delivering, be able to negotiate what I consider fair fees for what they're doing. I think it's the heyday of the 1980s or 90s? No, because I think there's just so much uncertainty, especially in the parts of some of these corporations, and maybe rightfully so, to spend money up front that they don't know that they're going to spend. And I think, unfortunately, there's no system in place that easily tracks images that would allow for compensation to be tracked, like, let's say, a song being played on the radio or something. But so in the meantime, what we tend to do is price these things up front, meaning you sign some sort of agreement that gives them unlimited use for an extended period of time, which means you're not doing secondary licensing, which is how some of us made a living for many years, and we're trying to get as much money up front as we can.
And I think that's a big shift for a lot of folks. I mean, one of the things is that's how the video industry has worked for years. This idea of having additional content. About the only way the video industry has additional things is, people come back for extra post work, and they come back to you to do additional editing based on the footage you've been, not because they don't own the content in many cases. Mm-hmm. It's much more common in the video industry for it to be treated as work for hire, and the client owns the end footage that was shot. But making sure that people know that there's that full service approach. So I think there's sort of two sides there. One is getting people to be prepared to have those buyout rates or those unlimited license rates where this is what I expect is fair. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, making sure you have a reason for them to keep coming back. Is it post-production? On the video side, it's more complex, and very few people are capable of doing that. These days, many people are capable, maybe not to the extent of the talented photographer or a rock solid assistant, but many people think they're capable of doing great photo editing. And, in many cases, I encounter clients who are just like, oh, just give me everything that was shot. And it's like, I
Right.
don't know if I want to just give you everything that was shot. How about we pick which images you want?
And in most cases, I think that they are asking for things they don't necessarily need for whatever reason. I used to work in a corporate environment, and you do have a little bit of training to do, and it depends on how much effort you want to put into this. But I think that there's a lot of coaching of at least the long-term clients that I have into what I offer them, what services can I offer to them, and what I'm delivering to them. And I think that and this is a little bit of what reputation building, if you will, part of your marketing plan, why they would come back to you again and again and again. And I remember a photographer, a very famous photographer, once told me in New York, he said, you only need 5 clients. Now, he was a fashion photographer. But the funny thing is, if you look back at his career, like I do, he every year only has about 5 clients. And over the course of his 35-year career, some of those clients have been the same.
Yeah.
So, you're not looking for hundreds of clients in most cases. You're looking for rock solid relationships, and you hope to build on those.
And that definitely makes sense. So retention's obviously a big strategy and issue. Let's take a quick moment just to thank another one of our sponsors. If you are looking to stay up to speed on all the latest changes happening in the world of professional photography as well as post-processing, Kelby Training has an extensive online class center that you could check out. That's over at kelbytraining.com, and we actually have a special discount that you could save $20 off of a membership if you visit the Photofocus website. Kelby Training has a lot of online classes. In fact, I just had 2 new courses released there, one on shooting and planning for DSLR video projects and another on all the post-processing workflow. So those just came out, and you're welcome to check those out. And there's tons more from top brand name photographers sharing tips, everything from wildlife photography to portraits to weddings and events. So all different types of photographers can find great classes there for online learning, as well as a lot of software-oriented classes as well. Just head on over to photofocus.com and take a look. You'll find a discount code there to save $20. So Richard, we've been talking about a lot of different business issues, and we've sort of been dancing around this. Let's talk just briefly about some of the biggest things happening on the copyright front. We're seeing Creative Commons coming up as a way of streamlining the process. We're also seeing changes happening to copyright in general. There's been a lot of interesting things happening around piracy on the internet lately with SOPA and people looking to protect content, lots of flare-ups happening. What's ASMP's position of where we stand today on copyright? Are we better off or worse off than we were 5 years ago?
Well, that's a great question. I probably ask myself that every morning when I wake up and when I go to sleep at night, because it's been on my mind for the last 5 years, at least as an ASMP director. Copyright's a very interesting animal because the copyright law we're currently under was created in 1976 and
pre-computers for all practical. I mean, there were computers, but this idea of a giant network of everybody's computer talking to each other didn't exist.
I mean, the irony is that when you look at that 1976 act, they were at that time bringing copyright up to technology at the time. And what they were really talking about was radio and TV, because the previous Copyright Act hadn't been updated since, 1909 or something. So you could, the laws around copyright tend to linger way behind technology. And if you just think about, and some of your listeners might think a little bit about how long ago 1976 was, not only didn't we have the network systems we have today, but VCRs didn't even exist at that time. Up until at that time, it was rare for the individual to interact with copyright on a regular basis. As David Carson of the U.S. Copyright Office has said during one of our symposia a few years ago, he said, everybody's a copyright infringer today. That wasn't the case in 1976. And so I think that the current law is way out of step with the technology and what's possible today. Having said that, there has been some revisions, some additions to the law in 1989 and 1998. Both saw some patches, if you will, to the law to allow, for one thing, we had the DMCA edition, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in 1998, that allowed for safe harbors that essentially created user-created content. If it hadn't been for that safe harbor, we wouldn't have YouTube and we wouldn't have Facebook today, which I guess some people would argue might have been an okay thing.
But there is benefits there. I mean,
Oh yeah,
one of the very practical things is that people who do choose to share their work that way are getting exposure. Although I think what's often lost in the copyright argument is that people get confused that it's about control, not about saying that everybody has to do this. Not everybody there's lots of people who choose not to copyright this work. There's lots of people who choose not to post to social media. You know, where's its struggle right now?
well, that is the very struggle, and that is that the one Copyright Act we have covers everybody from the major motion picture studios down to my mother, who creates pictures on her little, compact camera. Everybody is covered under the same law, but not everybody uses it the same way. And that's where it becomes very interesting. So you were talking a few minutes ago about some of these anti-piracy laws that Congress was considering. The challenge with most of those is it wasn't going to really impact the Rich Harringtons and the Richard Kellys or the mothers of the world. They were mostly geared towards the high-end copyright owners, the major studios and the pharmaceutical companies, and
the last round of copyright law we had was definitely skewed by the Hollywood industry. I mean, where some of the crimes for violating copyright were stricter than some of the crimes of, say, I don't know, killing someone accidentally.
Well, and that I think is where, when I talk about copyright to artist groups, I talk to it in the framework that we are very emotionally connected to the work we create as artists, and so when copyright enters into that conversation, we get emotional about that too. And I remember having a conversation with a very well-respected intellectual property attorney a couple of years ago, and I asked him this very question. I said, do you think that visual artists are more concerned about money or control? And he says, it depends on who you ask. And I think that's really where this argument comes down to, and that is that the way the copyright law is written now and the way that it is interpreted consistently by the courts, which in itself is an oxymoron, because I don't know that it ever is interpreted consistently, because different circuits interpret things in their own ways. But having said that, I think what's really interesting is that the main consumer wants to do one thing, but the law actually is saying something entirely different. And my personal opinion is that at some point those two things are going to come together and there's going to be a resolution. It's just in this in-between phase, there's a lot of emotion attached. And I think that you mentioned Creative Commons, and there's a lot of mystique and misinformation about copyright, but there's also even more mystique and misinformation about Creative Commons by all sorts of users. And I think that Creative Commons was an interesting solution for a problem where if you wanted to share your work, if you wanted to tell the world it's okay to share my work or to reuse my work or to mix my work, whatever, the copyright law doesn't allow for that on its own. So a licensing system like Creative Commons comes into play, and you can, as an artist, you can say, my writing is open, you can do X, Y, or Z with it. I'm giving you permission. The challenge, I think, for professionals, if you're being paid to license your work, is that Creative Commons may not fit into that MO, because it may cause some problems for exclusivity down the road or whatever. But for a group, there's definitely a group of people who are interested in getting their work out there. They're not necessarily interested in selling the work. Although part of the Creative Commons does allow for licensing for commercial use, I think that it's a very interesting solution, and I completely understand now, having studied it for about 5 or 6 years, where it fits into the marketplace. And I believe there is a place for Creative Commons for some artists, but for many professionals who license their work, maybe not so much. So.
Okay. So let's talk about just briefly a couple of good resources over at ASMP's website. You guys have a lot of stuff on copyright, some online tutorials for even if you've never registered your images before, how to pull it on. Can you tell people about a couple of things they should check out over there?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we almost all of, I'd say 80% of our resources are available to everyone. And as an emerging photographer, the two or three areas I think that you might want to explore, and these all fall underneath business resources that's on the homepage at asmp.org. One is interest in model releases and rights of privacy. It's a very misunderstood topic, but something that a lot of us should be more aware of and use model releases more regularly, if for no other reason than to start a conversation with the person you're photographing about what it is you're going to do with the pictures. So that resource, it's the model release tutorial. Very, very useful. The second area is the copyright tutorial, which gives you not only a pretty in-depth history of copyright and sort of all its iterations, but also gives you some practical advice on how to make sure you either protect yourself, if you're infringed, what you could do. If you want to go the extra step of registering your work, we have a tutorial on how to do that. Very soon, we'll have a tutorial on registering audiovisual works, which is, of course, slightly different than visual arts works. But if you're doing video or multimedia, that's something you might want to take. We'll be updating that very soon. And then I think finally, we have a section on pricing and licensing, and gives you practical advice on what types of boilerplate language you might want to include in your contracts, as well as common licensing models that most commercial photographers use. I will say that stuff is being updated probably over the summer, so you might want to go back and check it out from time to time and just see what's going on. Also, I just realized we have a social media best practices, and we were talking about Facebook and things like that. We had an attorney literally go through and read all the terms of service of many of these common photography and video sites, and he's kind of outlined some best practices for photographers if they have some concerns.
Who had the best score out of some of the popular sites, or who was the worst offender?
Well, I think that many of the common sites, Twitter and Facebook have some issues that I would like to see different, but I'm a pretty heavy user of, and I know you are too, of both Facebook and Twitter. And so you have to just understand what it is that they say. And at least to this point, we haven't seen any examples of them doing anything that would be, contrarian to that. I mean, every once in a while they try to do some privacy issues, but for the most part, I think their licenses that they're asking for, their terms of service, go a little bit beyond what they need. I think the big topic right now that ASMP is staying particularly attuned to is Pinterest. We've had, not me personally, but our executive director has had conversations with them, and it seems.
And for our listeners, Pinterest seems to be putting in their terms of service that we're liable for nothing if you use our service. You have to go after each individual. It's not our problem. We didn't do it. Everybody who's here is here at their own risk.
Exactly. And I think that it's a very, very interesting technology. It has, I think, some very interesting potential from a marketing standpoint for photographers and other visual artists. Having said that, I mean, it's uncertain how this is all going to play out. And they are aware of some of the hot button and pressure points that photographers and other people in the privacy community have. And they're a young company. So we have to see that there's going to be some growing pains. But at the same time, what ASMP does, I think, is we keep our eye on these things. And we do have conversations with some of these companies to try to see it from our perspective. And at least, what I would like to see is people just being good citizens. I mean, of course, we know that that's not always their interest. They have profit interests at stake. But I think, as a optimist, I like to think that we can make some improvements here and there. I think for photographers and visual artists who are using social media, I think you just have to be smart about what it is you're trying to do, and don't be frustrated. Don't worry about so much the 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 details of the terms of service that don't seem to be at stake right now, and focus mostly on why are you there and what are you getting out of it. And I think that that's, a risk assessment that you have to make for your business all the time. But to sit around and worry and complain about something that's really outside of most of our control, if you don't think it's a place for you to be, then don't be there. But at the same time, I don't know how you can be in this business today and not be there.
Well, your social media tutorial and some of those other ones look great. When you guys visit asmp.org, just click on the Business Resources tab, and then the first button's tutorials, and there's a ton of useful things there. I think it's really valuable content. I wanted to mention two more things from our sponsors, and then we'll get a couple of closeout advice from Richard here. Two of our sponsors have some really great things for you. One is Viewbug. So if you need to put together a photo contest, make sure you take a look at Viewbug. They have a very fun interactive engine that you can use, and this allows you to run photo contests on their site, have different entries, try it all out. It's really pretty cool how it works, allows for interaction of all the participants. So if you need to run a photo contest, take a look at Viewbug. And we actually have a contest running for the Photofocus website with some great prizes that you guys can see how that's working. And then another one is you'll find a link on the photofocus.com website to the digital SLR store. This is an extensive store that has all sorts of hand-picked gear and great things to check out. So if you are in the mood to shop and need to pick up some gear, be sure to take a look at that. And by supporting our sponsors, you're helping support the Photofocus website and podcast. So Richard, we're just about to the end of the show. One of the things we like to ask some of our guests is just a couple of fun pieces of gear or services that are helping you with your photography business. Tell us two or three things that you've been playing with lately. It could be equipment, or it could be support services or software products you like that you think other people should check out.
Well, it's funny. I find that being a photographer is kind of like that nice, happy medium between being all geeked out on equipment and then being like creative and inspirational at the same time. And it's a nice yin and yang approach. Lately, I've been exploring, of course, some of these new offerings by all the major players. It seems like this time of year is when all the software comes out. So my basic equipment package includes, on the computer side, the Lightroom 4 is an awesome tool. I don't know how you can be working today and not be working with that platform as a photographer. It's a huge, and it's one of the things I teach my digital students. On the other side of things, I'm a digital guy, but I have a long analog history. So right now, I find myself kind of going back and forth between shooting with my panoramic Holga and shooting with my Fuji X100, which is my kind of my new favorite camera. And I kind of go back and forth between those two things. And I'm also, I went through a phase of digital printing where I was printing on my inkjet printers and things. And lately I've been really excited about, well, it's probably been a couple of years now, just the offerings that some of these companies have, some of the ones you've mentioned sponsor-wise, working with different labs to do digital C prints. The quality is amazing, and the control is really enormous. And I just got a delivery a couple days ago, and just blew my mind, some of the products that are out there.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things where the printing business is taking off. Well, those are some good things for people to keep an eye on. Richard, where can people find out more about you? Social media connection. I think you're on Twitter as well.
Yeah, I think over the past year and a half, I've really been focusing on my Facebook presence. I have I tend to drop a lot of my ideas and things I've been reading about there at Facebook, and it's Facebook.com/Richard.Kelly. I was early in on that game. It's Kelly. I'm on Twitter, Richard Kelly Faux. I use it mostly to push out constant streams of tidbits of information, but probably the biggest conversation is happening on Facebook for me right now. And
you are tremendously active on there, but I do always enjoy your posts. You just come across some great articles. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on your show. And
yeah,
I would encourage you guys to strongly, if you are a Facebook user, consider following Richard. He has just great stories and great resources that he links to. So
right.
some good stuff there.
Well, I think, for me, I'm very interested in the creative process and how that ties back to technology and what we do as a business. I think that you can't separate those three things from each other. And so I just like to share what my curiosity, what I discover through my own curiosity. That's what I love about social media is that I read your posts and it inspires me to think about something else. And it's a great way, especially when you work by yourself most of the time, like I do, to be connected.
Great. Well, be sure to check that out. And if you want to follow me on social media, I'm just under Red Pixel, RHEDPIXEL. And you can find me on Twitter, or just take a look at my personal blog at Richard Harrington Blog. And a bunch of new tutorials going up to the photofocus.com site. I just recorded a few new Photoshop podcasts this morning, so be sure to check those out, and tons of great articles from our other host, Scott Bourne, as well. For Photofocus, my name's Rich Harrington. Richard, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And for those of you who have a chance, feel free to drop us a line or let us know a comment on the show. Your feedback is always welcome. And be sure to subscribe over in iTunes and post a review there so other people can discover the program. For Photofocus, my name's Rich Harrington.